Hello and welcome to The Rest of History. Today's episode is After the Khans, Part 1. Introduction. As some of you may know, I'm a coin collector, and I was looking at one of the coins in my collection, which happens to be Mongolian, and my mind began to wander. The writing on the coin is in Cyrillic, which is the same alphabet that Russian uses. That made me curious, and whilst I knew the coin was minted in 1945, the date on the coin said 35ON. What was this date referring to, and why was the coin in Cyrillic? I realized that whilst I was aware of Mongolia as a country today, and I knew about the great Mongolian empire of Genghis Khan and Kublai Khan and so on, the intervening time was rather mysterious to me. A little digging revealed that the date on the coin referred to Mongolia's declaration of independence from China in 1911. Those of you well versed in world history may recognize that date as the year of the Chinese Revolution, when the last Manchu or Qing emperor was deposed and the Chinese Republic was founded. It is no coincidence that Mongolia seized the opportunity this period of change and confusion offered to assert its own independence. But how did Mongolia go from the home of one of the world's largest empires to a province of China? The Mongols had fallen far since the time of Genghis and Kublai. As the Yuan dynasty, the descendants of Genghis had once ruled over China, yet at the turn of the 20th century they were vassals of the Chinese Qing Empire. In this podcast we'll look at what became of Mongolia after the Khans and how it came to be under China's suzerainty. Part 1. Mongolia's decline. In 1368 the last Yuan emperor, Togun Temur, fled from China after his defeat by the Ming. He returned to Mongolia, claiming that he and his descendants, as Khagans, had the right to rule the Mongols. However, the Mongolia they returned to had ceased to exist as a unified country. The Mongols and their subgroups, such as the Oirats, had fractured, and the Mongols largely existed as independent tribes scattered across eastern Central Asia. In fact, when the Yuan dynasty fell, the Mongolian Empire as a single entity was already a thing of the past. Infighting and factionalism at the death of the fourth great Khan, Ming Khan, in 1259, scarcely 30 years since Genghis' death, led to full-blown civil war, of which Kublai Khan was a participant. This resulted in the division of the empire into four autonomous khanates: the Golden Horde in the northwest, the Ilkhanate in the southwest, the central Chagatai Khanate, and the Yuan dynasty founded by Kublai, based around China. The ruler of the Yuan dynasty was the nominal Great Khan and held status amongst the other khanates. The Mongolian heartland was mainly within the Yuan dynasty's realm. The steppe aristocracy continued to be important, but the empire's focus had definitively shifted to China. China's population and infrastructure dwarfed that of the steppe, making it a logical seat for the emperor. Yet despite its power, the Yuan dynasty lasted less than a century. Founded in 1271, by the 1350s rebellion consumed the land. The agitation has been attributed to discrimination against the Han Chinese, overtaxation, and massive flooding of the Yellow River leading to devastation of the economy. Many groups revolted, including the Red Turban in 1351. In 1352, a peasant named Zhu Yuanzhang joined the Red Turban group. 15 years later, after making a name for himself as a rebel commander, defeating his rivals, and having people conveniently die, Zhu Yuanzhang was on his march for the imperial throne. 1 year later he was crowned as the Hongwu Emperor, head of the Ming dynasty. This defeat at the hands of Zhu and the Ming Chinese is what forced Togun Temur to flee China and return to the steppe. There he and his descendants would continue on as nominal rulers of the Mongols under the title of the Northern Yuan. The mere nominality of their rule was helped by the crushing defeat the Ming inflicted upon the Northern Yuan in 1388. This paved the way for a century of Oirat or Western Mongol ascendancy. The Chinese also gave support to the Oirats against the other Mongol groups, until the Oirat themselves became a threat to China. This fracturing of the Mongol peoples and leadership meant that the following centuries featured much infighting, warlordism, and bids for the title of Great Khan from various contenders. However, the Northern Yuan would rise again under Dayan Khan, who was crowned in 1479. Dayan and his wife Mandukhai defeated the Oirats and reunified the Mongols, helping to solidify their identity as a people. He fought against the Muslim rulers of Central Asia and greatly expanded the Mongolian Empire. Raids on Ming China were stepped up, with the Three Guards, who were tributary states to China, being captured. In 1514 and 1517 the Mongols were able to invade China, and Dayan left his sons to set up permanent border garrisons. During the 1517 invasion, Dayan was even able to threaten Beijing itself, and though his army was turned back, it marked a high point for the Mongols after a century and a half of internal strife. Dayan also reformed the Mongol nation, organizing Mongolia into 6 tumens to function as military and administrative bodies. His decision to leave each tumen to a different son worked to decentralize the Mongol state, but it managed to ensure that peace remained and allowed for a century of Mongol unity and expansion. Dayan Khan is now remembered as one of the greatest Khans, and his wife Mudakhai is known as the Wise, and her abilities as a commander well recognized. The coming of Buddhism. A feature that would come to define Mongolia was the adoption of Buddhism. From the 16th century, the mounted warrior class gave way to yellow-robed lamas. This was to have a profound effect on the Mongols, though it is often given as a reason for their decline, especially by authors during the socialist period. The Mongolian Khans were exposed to the Buddhist faith in their position as emperors of China, and through them the religion entered the native Mongol lands, having greater success than other introduced faiths such as Christianity and Islam. However, with the expulsion of Turgun Temur and the Mongols from the Middle Kingdom, China, cross-cultural exchange declined, and Buddhism faded in favor of the return of local shamanism. Buddhism returned to Mongolia in the late 1500s, spreading from east to west. Worship of local deities and natural phenomenon continued, but became incorporated into the Buddhist practices. The Mongols became followers of the Tibetan school, known as the Yellow Hat School, or Lamaism. In fact, the title Dalai Lama is a Tibetan-Mongolian hybrid, bestowed by the Mongolian chief Altan Khan upon the head of the Tibetan church, Soman Gyatso, when he came to Mongolia to help organize the faith's junior branch in 1578. Sonam Gyatso visited Mongolia several times, and with Altan Khan and his son Durin Khan, he sponsored temples and helped to spread the faith. Buddhist lamas sought to stamp out shamanism, forcing it underground through persecution of shamans. In the 17th century, the powerful Zaya Pandita Lama of the Oirad Mongols ordered anyone associating with shamanism to have his property confiscated and dog dung spread on his face. However, the spread of Buddhism had its limits, and it didn't take hold amongst the Dakhur and the Buryat Mongols in the far north and northeast near Lake Baikal. Tibetan Buddhism flourished in Mongolia, helped by the Mongolian nobles' hopes that the faith would help to unify the Mongolians. After Sonam Gyatso's death, the 4th Dalai Lama was found to be a Mongolian, a boy of the Khalkha Mongols, the largest Mongolian subgroup, who had been converted in 1588. The Khalkha also received their own spiritual head, the Jibtsun Damba Khutuktu, whom the 5th Dalai Lama later recognized as the reincarnation of the scholar Taranatha. Tibetan Buddhism may have also had a helping hand in its spread to Mongolia. This was the fact that pre-Buddhist Tibetan religion and culture, which influenced the development of Lamaism, had also influenced early Mongolian culture. Mongolia and Tibet already spoke something of a common cultural language, and the form of Buddhism imported to Mongolia was one that had already been blended heavily with this culture. This early Tibetan religion is sometimes called Bon. However, as Bon was not codified until the 11th century, some dispute calling the earlier religion by this name. It is said that in the reign of Trisong Detsun, king of Tibet in the late 8th century, the merits of the various forms of Buddhism were discussed, with the esoteric Indian way winning out over the intellectual Chinese style. The king felt this was more appropriate for his pastoral people, and it was evidently a wise decision on his part, both for Buddhism's future in Tibet and also Mongolia. Lama Buddhism is also a lot more flashy than many other forms of Buddhism. It has many bright and lively festivals, a well-developed pantheon, and many tantric and mystical elements that would have attracted those with a shamanic background. In contrast with China, where temples were places secluded from the world, in Mongolia temples were centers of social life. The faith, its brightly dressed priests and temples, served as beacons in the vast and lonely steppe. Shamanism didn't offer the security in this life, nor the comfort at the end of it, that Buddhism could give the Mongols. Much like in Tibet, the spiritual descendants of the Mongolian living Buddha came to wield temporal power, and Mongolia was essentially governed as a theocracy until 1924. The lay nobility and the high lamas became the twin pillars of feudalism. It's estimated that up to 40% of the male population entered the lamasseries to become monks, and the vows of celibacy that they took came to have a damaging effect on the population of Mongolia. Boys typically entered the monastery at aged 8, becoming first acolytes, then taking further vows, including celibacy and renouncing the material world. Such life has been compared to medieval Catholic monks. It has been argued that through this removal of the male workforce, as well as the spending of surplus wealth on the monasteries rather than reinvesting the money in the economy, the conservative political and social system enforced by the allied priests and princes caused Mongolia to stagnate. The people were encouraged to focus on improving their next incarnation through good religious deeds, rather than striving to improve one's current lot in life. However, the temples and priests also had a cultural output of their own, producing texts and artwork, studying medicine, and so on. In many ways, the situation can be compared with the power and influence of the Christian Church in early medieval Europe. Chinese annexation. By the time of the last great Khan, Ligdan, 1604 to 1634, the Mongols were once again in conflict with both each other and the Chinese, now under the rule of the Manchu Qing, with many southern Mongolian tribes having already surrendered to Chinese vassalage. The Qing had emerged from the Jurchen people in northeast China and were not themselves Han Chinese. In 1616, Nurhaci, leader of a Jurchen tribe, having unified the Jianzhou, declared himself Khan of the Great Jin and began to move against the Ming. 2 years later he announced his 7 grievances and openly opposed the Ming. Nurhaci and his Jurchen soon came into close contact with the Khorchin Mongols. Nurhaci's policy was to befriend the Khorchin and intermarry with them, removing a risk to his own power and gaining an ally against the Ming. His policies resulted in the Mongols under his banner being absorbed into the growing Jurchen or Manchu nation, and by 1644 what is now Inner Mongolia was annexed by the Qing. With Ligdan's son Eiji having surrendered to the Qing in 1634, and so ending the northern Yuan dynasty, the way for the final fall of the remaining Mongols into Chinese vassalage was paved. This was directly precipitated by the actions of a would-be latter-day Khagan named Galdan Khan. Son of the Oirat ruler of Jungaria in today's northwest China, Galdan had originally taken vows at Lhasa. However, he returned home to take part in the succession crisis of his people, and in 1676 he emerged as Khan of his people. After unifying the local tribes and occupying Kashgar at the behest of the Dalai Lama, Galdan turned his attention east. In 1688 he invaded Khalkha territory in what is now the country of Mongolia. In response, the Khalkha princes sought aid from the Chinese Qing Emperor Kangxi. In 1696 the emperor won a great victory over Galdan, who fled and shortly thereafter died. This allowed the Khalkha princes to return to their lands, and as the price for this Chinese military assistance, the following year they swore homage to Kangxi. With the temporal rulers of Mongolia now bound to the Qing, the Chinese also took steps to ensure that it was they who picked the people discovered to be the Buddhist reincarnations. This allowed them to favour reincarnations amongst the Tibetans, and so stop a powerful Mongolian figurehead from coming into existence. China proceeded to take control of more of eastern Central Asia, absorbing Tibet and Xinjiang, now Xinjiang. In this it was not alone, as the Russian Empire pushed eastward, taking Siberia before pushing south into the Central Asian Khanates. Soon all of Central Asia was absorbed by the empire, and an independent Mongolian state was no more. In the next episode we will look at Mongolia under the Qing, how Mongols won their independence, and how in turn they became a Soviet-aligned state, before becoming the modern country we see today. Thanks very much for listening. Goodbye.